Hi, everyone. Really excited to introduce Seema, Amble, Ivan, both from Andreessen Horowitz, our investors there. We work extremely closely with them. They have unparalleled insight into what's happening in the CFO tech stack. And I asked them today to share their really candid perspectives on really how they see evolution in the CFO tech stack, some of the interesting innovation they're seeing, and what should be top of mind for CFOs today. So with that, I'll hand over to you both.
We're excited to be here. We'll introduce ourselves quickly. My name is Ivan, so I'm on the operating side of the firm, which means that when Seema writes a check, I get to work with the companies that she writes a check with. So she looks into the future. We deal with investors current. So joined the firm after being an operator. Like many of you, I've led the finance teams at 2 startups, most recently at Webflow, and then jumped on the dark side and now work with our companies, and specifically one of my big focuses is CFO office.
Great to see everyone this morning. I'm Seema, a partner at Andreessen. I've been here for 6 years. I've spent a lot of time looking at the CFO stack here. I spent about a decade investing in software before and looked at the last generation of software, which you guys probably all don't like, which is, I won't name any names, but you guys know the FP&A players and ERPs that are not so fun to work with. But the fun part about my job is that I get to think about the future and also invest in what I think is the future. And so we've made a bunch of bets in this category. One of them we're very excited about is Sequence. And excited to share a little bit about how we think about this category with you all.
So Seema is one of the most active investors in this category and maybe wrote the biggest checks this summer. So my question to you, what gets you excited when you think about the space, and why were you so active this summer?
So just to back up a little bit, in 2020, myself and my partner Angela wrote a piece on the CFO in crisis, is what we called it. And we looked at the fact that a lot of the other functions, your peers in other areas at companies, had modern software, and you guys were all still dealing with NetSuite, pen and paper, Excel, and old closed processes and software, all of this stuff, invoices being uploaded manually, and it was just a really antiquated way of doing your jobs. One of the things out of that piece was a pyramid we put together, which essentially said that a lot of the work was being done at the bottom, which is like bookkeeping, a lot of the record keeping, a lot of the manual transaction logging, and your time is really, and your team's time is really being spent at the bottom. As you go up and start doing more of the automation, going up to the strategic work, less time is spent there. But theoretically, like, you guys are all well-trained, excited to do your jobs. You want to be spending more time at the top. Now, fast forward a couple of years, we've got all these leaps forward in AI. The thing that's most exciting is now we can actually automate a lot of that stuff at the bottom of the pyramid, and unlock time for your team to spend on the more strategic things. So part of the reason that we've invested a bunch most recently is we're starting to see that impact of AI on the category. Everything from really painstaking stuff like revenue recognition and invoice ingestion to, on the ERP side, literally just a modern way to ingest data, track it, provide an up-to-date your financial position. Procurement is another area, taxes. But these are all areas that are now just being enabled by AI because it can do the data extraction and connectivity in a way that we couldn't do before.
So you look at a lot of decks, a lot of ideas in the space, and as an investor. And so what were some of them that surprised you in a really good way and that came out in maybe in the last 12 months?
Yeah, I think, first of all, actually using AI. And to be clear, right, like, transaction categorization had been powered by ML for a long time. At least a couple of years, we've been seeing startups doing that. However, if you looked at OCR as a category, LLM-powered OCR is so much more powerful and accurate than the OCR that we had to parse documents 3 or 4 years ago. And so part of it is just like the technology has shifted, and you see people in these decks having leveraged the change in tech that we know, because we see at Andreessen a lot of the underlying infrastructure changing, and it's very exciting to see folks apply it to an area like the CFO stack. I think the other thing is, in the decks that we've seen, I think we are starting to see that actually there's connectivity between the user and the technology. So a lot of times in the past, there have been categories of software created. There have been a bunch of FP&A software providers that had come out maybe 4 or 5 years ago that weren't using AI. But some of them were worked well for the buyer and some didn't. And so I think what I'm seeing now is you hear, not necessarily just from the deck, but also from talking to customers, that this is actually transformational for teams their time, the insights they're able to get, and it's not just like also a chat bot. It's actually the work that's going on in the background. You're actually spending less time in the software because the software just magically works for you.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think when I look who's in the room today, operators, people that run startups and companies and departments and functions, and it's very similar. I think everyone's getting bombarded with different names, different solutions, different new things that they should try. And just like you, they think, well, how do I pick a winner? Because you can only pick one to run a specific thing. So how do you do that? How do you sort of sift through the noise?
What Yvonne is alluding to, when we invest, we typically have met everybody in a category and we're saying, okay, this is the one that we think at this stage is going to be the winner. And one of the things that we do is talking to all of you and saying, okay, what's the product that's really catching your eye? Which would you pick? And that's partly, us going out and talking to potential customers. The other thing we see a lot is, we have an internal finance leaders email list. We also talk to accountants and fractional CFOs, and when we are in conversation, certain products start coming up in conversation quite frequently. You're like, okay, we've never heard them get excited about a piece of software, and here they're proactively bringing it up to us. Something has changed and something is interesting here. And so those are some of the signals. And then we look at the products ourselves and all the standard investor metrics, et cetera. But I think when you hear that market pull, that's a really important sign to us.
Yeah, and it's people building on AI right now, usually using same infrastructure, same underlying models. But how do you think about the mode in the category? What separates one company from another?
Candidly, at the Series A, there is usually no moat, right? Like it is, and a lot of these products start out early with different wedges. It's hard to say what a moat is, but I think what the moat will be over time is capturing your workflow. And like you as users, you're like, I want to delegate more responsibility to the software and lean on it more. And it's, and when we call you guys, you're like, yeah, I actually don't want to rip it out because I need it for XYZ processes, and more of that processing people are sort of dependent on the software within your companies. And so that ends up being a moat. But at the early stages, it's more, are you seeing the user delight from the product?
Yeah, really interesting. And one of my theories now is that we're also not seeing the very quick evolution of the technology that the finance team is using, but also evolution of what the finance teams actually do. So maybe let's shift to that and talk a little bit about that. From your experience, especially as you talk to the users or the early adopters of some of the startups that we invest into, what are some of the themes that are coming out around the profession itself? Like, how's the office of the CFO changing from your point of view?
Yeah, and Yvonne, you should chime in on this too, having sat in the seat yourself. I think, across accounting, on the accounting side of things, right, there's a shortage of people who want to and are trained to do accounting tasks. And so there's that need that needs to be met. I think you see overall more people coming into the finance function who are not from a traditional accounting background and have come from more of a biz ops, general business background, which means they're not trained in accounting the same way. And so you need a lot of those tools. You also just see people not wanting to do things like invoice ingestion and rev rec, even if they are trained in it. And so they'd rather just have it automated, right? And I think the other piece too is if you're using ChatGPT in every other part of your life, or you're able to quickly query things, not need to sit and wait for a document to be processed in every other part of your life, why would you be using a fax machine, right, for the finance function? So I think that's the other piece.
Yeah, from my perspective, what's interesting, we talk about as a firm that we're in a super cycle. We always get the question every day, are we in the bubble? But at the same time, it definitely feels like a super cycle because there's a new technology that arrived and so much is being built on the new technology. And what that means is the last time we've seen a super cycle was with the arrival of the iPhone. And that essentially replaced computer for most of the tasks that we're doing on the computer. Now it feels like a chore to actually be sitting on the laptop. And so in the same way with AI, and we're seeing it just spread throughout the office of the CFO and all of the other departments. And in fact, what's interesting is that the more finance leaders I talk to, the more I realize usually the task of implementing AI at a company lands on the finance team plate. And when the founder says we have to go AI first, AI native in all of our departments, finance is giving the task. So the way I've been thinking about it is that we're often, the last decade, we talked about how CFOs and the Office of Finance needs to be strategic. That's still true. We still definitely own the financial strategy of the company. But at the same time, what we're also seeing is that CFOs are becoming the architects of the tech stack of the company. And part of it is because the budget and the headcount are closely tied together. More than ever, there's a conversation around, does it have to be another headcount? Does it have to be another person? Do we throw a body at a problem, or do we throw an application at a problem? And so that's changing quickly. And the last thing, Seema and I oftentimes host dinners together, and we have a conversation around like very common topic. And you all go to these dinners as well. Like, what's the latest thing you've implemented? And 12 months ago, the answer was nothing. We really are just even afraid to start using ChatGPT inside our enterprise, inside our company for security reasons. That tide completely changed now. And so what we're seeing is that all of the stuff that I've recently attended, is that everybody's trying something. Everybody is experimenting. People are using, whether it's chat or whether it's the new technology, new products, they're implementing, they're trying. I don't think there is a golden stack of things that we had 6-7 years ago when we were in the SaaS era, and you knew exactly what you needed for each stage of the company. So there's definitely we're in a bit of a war of technology right now, because all of these new companies are emerging and competing against each other. But at the same time, it feels like, especially when we talk to the founders and we often advise them on what type of leader they should hire, that's becoming a default question. How are you approaching the technology? It's becoming a default thing they look at in the interview process. Is this somebody that is actually using AI creatively? Is this something? Is that somebody that will take us into the next era where we don't need as much headcount? We've been fascinating to see some of the largest, fastest growing companies right now are some of the smallest by headcount, and they're able to do a lot more by product, so on and so forth. So I think there's a battle. The other things we often talk about, of course, AI actually replacing labor. Not so much maybe the humans, but certainly labor, and you can automate a lot of the things.
Yeah, and one part, it's not just also being able to use and be excited about a new generation of software, but I think a lot of the finance folks have to be familiar with data and like think about things from a data first perspective versus more of a process first perspective, which I think is what we had, seen before. And so it's not just being like technically versed in what you need to do, but like, can you solve your problems with data? And now there's the tooling to go do it yourself without needing, bring on an engineer to go build your own systems internally. So can you do that and become, make your team even smarter?
Yeah. 3 weeks ago, one of the dinners I was at, everybody was talking about building agents and not just asking engineers to build agents, but actually doing it themselves. And so that's possible. Lastly, to to wrap up really quick, if maybe that's a question for both of us. If you were working at a startup right now as a founder, what would you be building right now in the finance space? Let's assume it's a finance space.
Oh, man. Well, okay. I'm going to take the cheeky answer and say I've invested in a bunch of companies, and I love what Sequence is doing. I've got an ERP bet. You're invested in taxes. So I'm going to say that I don't want to compete with any of my portfolio companies because they're all awesome. But I do think the principle is finding these really manual workflows and automating it. And I know I keep saying this over and over again, but think about all of the wasted time you guys have on like reconciliation, ingestion of documents, whether it's like work papers or ledgers or just literally going between Salesforce and your billing cycle, between your invoicing and what's in the ERP. All of that stuff is not tied together well. I had a friend I was talking to who had they had 6 different bank accounts. Those numbers didn't reconcile with what the cash number was in the board deck, and we spent a bunch of time. This was at a board meeting trying to figure out what didn't work, and that shouldn't happen. You shouldn't be spending your time on trying to be a sleuth for that type of thing. So anyways, long story short, I still think there's a lot on the manual process that needs to be replaced.
Yeah, I would say very similarly. I don't know of a specific problem, otherwise I'd probably be building it right now, and Seema would be funding it. But I think it's, in finance, accounting, so on and so forth, we often dream about becoming farmers and just living off the grid and with the animals. And so what is it? And it's because, like Seema said, we actually spend disproportionate amount of time on really boring and very necessary, but really terrible tasks. And so I would pick one of those problems and retain more people in the profession.
The one other thing I'll say is, going back to this pyramid that we had put in this article, I think what companies are right now are getting right is they're at the bottom, whereas 3 or 4 years ago, we had a bunch of FP&A software companies try to do a layer sort of in the middle, which is try to sit on top of existing data and then create software. And what you ended up seeing was they broke because they didn't scale with the companies as they grew, because they didn't actually capture the system of truth. They weren't a system of record. And now you're actually capturing the system of record. So I think the manual workflow is going back to that. It is, you are capturing the data to become the system of record, and you can kind of build the stuff on top. But I do think that's like a fundamental shift that you have to get right now.
Yeah. Thank you, Seema.
No, thanks, Ivan.
Excited to see what's coming next.
Yeah.